Hello, CRE 101 students. Today I am going to do a short video that introduces our module on evidence. And remember, your big question that you need to answer here is how good is the evidence? So let's get started. Here's my contact information, and you have this Prezi available to you as a link. So if I go through this too quickly, of course, stop at any point. And make adjustments that you need. By the end of these series of videos, you should be able to identify the types of evidence used in arguments, and you should be able to examine the evidence of an argument by asking the appropriate questions. This is going to be a series of videos that really provide you with more questions than answers. That's the nature of looking at the evidence. So let's just talk about why very quickly. Why do we go over this? This is, as you saw earlier, has to do with two of the course competencies for this class. It's very, very important to determine the evidence of an argument, mostly because it will affect you. It affects your shopping choices. It affects your choice of who you vote for, which is your civic engagement. Does one candidate make more sense to you than another? You need to assess that. What if you're on a jury? Do you, on a jury, want to examine the evidence? What if you, God forbid, have to find yourself as a defendant? Do you want the jurors to be people that examine the evidence? How do you know whether to buy an argument if you don't evaluate the evidence? Essentially, we make educated decisions that affect our lives, and examining the evidence will help us to make a more informed decision. So here is the slide that you're going to need to write down, and there will be more when we look at different types of evidence, because you ask different questions based on the type of evidence that you see. In general, though, any kind of evidence, you could ask these general questions. So I'm going to click on each one and let you write them down. If I go too quickly, stop the video and write them down. But these are things you will need to know in order to do the practice exercises. You have to ask, is the information current? Is it accurate? Is the source biased? Is the author expressing fact or opinion? And what are the credentials of the author? All of these are really important questions, and we've really talked about some of these before, particularly this biased source, and there's more to do on this. There's more to do on all of these, but I want to look at this right here, fact and opinion, because when I do this session with a group of face-to-face students, I'll ask them to participate in this activity. I'm going to ask you to do the same thing. On your paper, write 1 to 5. And I'm going to put a statement up here, and you are going to determine whether the statement is fact or the statement is opinion. And just write an F or an O, and then we'll talk about it. So here's the first one. 2/3 of all the world's cilantro comes from a single valley in Italy. So think about cilantro and all of the Latin American cuisines, all of the Asian cuisines that make use of that spice. And it comes from 2/3 of it comes from a single valley in Italy. Contrary to popular belief, the white is not the healthiest part of an egg. It's actually the shell. So again, you're writing number 1, F or O. Number 2, fact or opinion. Here's your third one. The most popular pizza topping in Europe is tuna. 4. 34 million pounds of Parmesan cheese are being held in an Italian bank vaults as collateral from cheesemakers struggling through the recession. The cheese is valued at $187 million. And your fifth one, the odds are 1 in 14, or 7%, that you claim that you rarely or never bathe. So if you haven't done so, take a moment to write down fact, opinion, fact, opinion, fact, opinion, fact, opinion for all 5 of these. Stop the video if you can't decide, and then we'll move on. Okay. When I do these with face-to-face groups of people, I generally get varied answers. Very, very often, this one comes in as part of the group thinks it's fact, part of the group thinks it's opinion. Almost all groups consider this one an opinion. This just seems really weird that 7% of the people would say they never or rarely bathe. It just seems like it can't be true. So I get varied responses on this one, varied responses on this one. This also seems unreal. That's an unreal amount of cheese that's being held for collateral. And so people oftentimes will give me varied responses to these. I think the reason they give me a varied response is because they're really answering the question, is it true or is it false? And some of these just seem really, really unlikely to be true. This one's got the word belief in it. But in reality, all of these statements are facts. And if you got fact for all of them, awesome. You can probably go through the rest of this very, very quickly. If you were confused or conflicted about some of them, or you think maybe, yeah, I did answer them as true or false, the real crux of this, or the crux of this that I want you to write down is this, that fact does not mean true. Fact means you can verify if it is or isn't true. This gets confusing because in our vernacular, and in other words, in our common language, we think that fact is the same as true, and we kind of use them interchangeably. But in actuality, what makes a fact is that you can go and look it up. A fact is something you can verify, or you can determine its accuracy. If you can disprove it, it doesn't mean it hasn't been a fact all along. It just means it's a false fact, an unsubstantiated fact, an unverified fact. That's a really important thing to know when we're evaluating evidence, because authors will use factual statements multiple times to support their arguments, but unless we verify it, it may not actually be credible. So information may support an idea, but it doesn't mean it's valuable or credible. You, as the critical reader, need to do the extra step to determine whether the idea behind it and the support behind it, the evidence behind an argument, is verified or credible or valuable. The next portion that we'll talk about is what types of evidence are there and how we can ask different types of questions to verify or to determine the credibility or the strength of the evidence. So this will be divided into two parts. I'll talk first about verifiable evidence, and I will talk then about non-verifiable evidence. And either way, there are ways that you can assess the evidence to determine whether it's strong or whether it's weak, and that's really what we're getting at here.